To hang 10. I'm going to ask you to listen in, and I'm going to ask you to think about what's moving you and what's energizing you, so that we might be able to reflect on that as we come back. For now, though, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go to our final round of speakers. I'm starting off with His Excellency Mark Russell Sola, the Secretary of State for Agriculture and Sustainable Development of Andorra. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. Es un placer estar.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, the challenges that the world is facing today mean that we need to broaden existing commitments, and we are convinced that today is the opportunity to do so. Andorra is a mountainous country with 80,000 inhabitants that are especially vulnerable to climate change. We are actively working, and we have a concrete action plan in order to reduce our emissions and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. At an economic level, we have set a final level of taxes, which is going to feed a green fund fully and facilitate climate action. Setting a price for carbon at 30 euros per tonne on hydrocarbons allows us to fund programs for sustainable mobility, energy efficiency and renewable energies. Our proposal has been based on the Sustainable Development Goals, and we have recently approved the new law on public contracts in order to align our programs with global goals. Digital technologies must facilitate exchange of knowledge and innovation, and we have an ambitious plan to digitalize our administration. We are about to approve a law on the circular economy in order to reduce waste, to reduce food waste, and also water consumption, and also to forbid those plastics with greatest impact. These are some of the most recent measures that we have adopted in order to accelerate application of the environmental part. We are very aware that the participation of civil society, and especially young people, is absolutely vital. For this reason, they are active members of the national commissions that define environmental policy in our countries. And this also involves exchanging knowledge, cooperating in order to move forward in light of the specific and social needs of each country. This is the only way that we will be able to achieve our ambitious goals.
Your Excellency, as I make my way to our next speaker, to thank His Excellency for keeping to time, and to ask that this being the final round, this is where we make or break whether we're getting the job done or not. And so to kindly request once more that we keep to the allocated time. Our next speaker is Her Excellency Catherine Schienberger, the State Secretary, also in the Director of the Federal Office for the Environment of Switzerland. Madam, you have the floor, Your Excellency.
Very much, Moderator. Dear colleagues, let me highlight 4 areas where concrete action is needed to move towards more sustainable consumption and production. First, transforming our food systems towards more sustainability and resilience is key to addressing several of the challenges of our time, including biodiversity loss and climate change. Second, as we know, fossil fuel subsidies affect negatively climate change and impede sustainable development. Similarly, we also have to reduce subsidies that are harmful to biodiversity. We need more action on harmful subsidies. Third, we urgently need to strengthen the environmental sustainability of mineral management in order to achieve the environmental dimension of the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. With the adoption of the UNEA 5.2 resolution on environmental aspects of minerals, Member States have a mandate to develop proposals for action. We must seize this opportunity. Finally, I would like to shed light on sand. UNEP has identified sand as one of the greatest sustainability challenges of the 21st century. One has to say that our societies are built on sand.
Sure.
The Global Sand Observatory Initiative by UNEP Grid is a first important step towards a better understanding of our use of sand. But we need to go further to identify policy solutions. Colleagues, these are 4 concrete proposals, but what is needed foremost, that is the political will to act. I sincerely hope that this Stockholm+50 conference strengthens our common and individual will. Thank you so much.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. Concrete actions outlined and bringing into sharp focus the challenge of sand. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm yielding the floor right now to His Excellency Laszlo Borbeli, the State Councillor and Coordinator of the Sustainable Development Department in the Office of the Prime Minister of Romania. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, distinguished guests. I believe that 2015 was a milestone in the history of humankind, and I believe that the 3 documents, the Paris Climate Accord, the 2030 Agenda, and the Addis Abeba roadmap was a milestone. In which stage we are now? First of all, in my opinion, there are some basic issues. First, we need political will. And in Romanian Parliament, we were the first from 171 from IPU that we have a very strong political declaration in 2016. We have a department near the Prime Minister's office, led by myself and my colleagues since 5 years. I served for 6 prime ministers, and each of them, they were in favor of implementing Agenda 2030. But we need more than be in favor. And so we established an interinstitutional framework. Now we are capable to have the political will, a consultative council on the level of academia, and a body which is our partner regarding the civil society. We need more dialogue with the society. We need to convince them that we need more. And the basic issue is education and research. And that's why we have a new occupation in Romania, expert in sustainable development. It's very important. We will have a center of excellence to serve just public administration, and we will have more than 2,000 experts in different areas until 2026. We need more. And finally, I prove a Rubik Cube, you know. This is a Rubik Cube of sustainability with 17 SDGs. If we have now in place one piece of this Rubik Cube, we have a problem in our lives. Let's have these pieces on this place, on our places, and to be more happiest, to be more peaceful, to be more healthy for us and the next generations. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. A visual example of what we're trying to do. Everything needs to be in its place. Thank you very much for that. Distinguished guests, I'm now yielding the floor to the distinguished representative from the Confederation of Swedish Enterprise. And I'd love to give you the floor, Madam.
Thank you. Dear ladies and gentlemen, as a framing of the Stockholm+50, we have a holistic perspective on sustainable development. And that is indeed the 1.5-degree target, and it's also other important parts of climate and environment, and also the social parts. But let's not forget about the economic part of sustainable development, because we have the sustainable economic growth as a key component here, where the business community is actually driving. So with a sustainable economic growth, we will have the prerequisite to invest in both scaling up of already existing technologies, but also in innovation for new ones. So many companies already today have sustainable development at the core of their business models. And let us also focus on the implementation, as has already been said, on the circular economy for real. And let us also enable the policy making that then kind of fosters innovation, as for example within technologies, disruptive technologies, I should say, for example, fossil-free steel, green batteries, and also green chemistry. And we need also global solutions to global problems, such as a common CO2 price. So to end up with, we need to focus also on skills development and new types of jobs, specifically for our young generation, in terms of what is driven from sustainable development, but also the digital transformation. So the business community is driving, and we should also focus on the entrepreneurship that we find, for example, in the developing economies. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the distinguished representative from the Confederation of Swedish Enterprise. Distinguished guests, I'm yielding the floor now to the distinguished representative from PUSH, Sweden. I'd like to yield the floor to you, please.
Thank you. Excellencies and distinguished delegates. When world leaders came together 50 years ago, this is not what they envisioned. A triple planetary crisis of ramping climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution, a global pandemic, rising inequalities, war and conflicts ravaging the world, existential threats to our future as youth and children and as a species on this planet. What will come out of this meeting will shape the future for decades to come. Yet, I've seen but empty words and broken promises. And I can't help but ask, what are we doing here? It's like we're on Titanic. We have hit the iceberg. We have millions of people dying in the cold water as we speak because the rich refuse to share their lifeboats, whilst they continue drinking their champagne, fully aware of the future awaiting the rest of us if they do not act right now. But it seems like you still do not understand. The message has still not been heard. It's being intentionally ignored. We are in a global crisis. We cannot continue living our lives pretending like nothing has changed. The actions are clear. The Global Youth Policy Paper is the action plan from Stockholm+50. And we call on you to establish a fossil fuel treaty to phase out our dangerous addiction of oil, gas and coal, to criminalize ecocide and to reform our economies beyond GDP growth, addressing the corruption and tax evasion present among leaders in this very room, and to put your money where your mouth is. Finally, ensuring global solidarity with the most marginalized communities, with youth and children, and including us in shaping a better future. Because we are today, we are tomorrow, but I'm afraid we might not have a future. So step up or step aside. Our lives depend on it.
Thank you very much to the distinguished speaker. We are on the Titanic and it is sinking as we speak. Step up or step aside is the message. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor now to yield the floor to Her Excellency Liliana Gutan, the head of the UN and Specialized Agencies Unit in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and European Integration of the Republic of Moldova. Madam, Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to join this leadership dialogue aiming at accelerating the implementation of the environment dimension of the sustainable development to ensure a healthy planet with prosperity for all. We all agreed in this regard that, including in the last 2 days, it's paramount to capitalize on the momentum for change and determined actions to address the triple planetary crisis, and we don't have other 50 years. One of the panelists mentioned previously that we have 8 years to turn it back, but we already know that some processes are irreversible. Republic of Moldova stands ready to contribute to the shared global response and promote multilateral cooperation to ensure that the world is on the track to reach the vision of living in harmony with nature. From this standpoint, we reiterate our full commitment to Paris Agreement objectives as well as the environment dimensions of the 2030 agenda. Previously, one of the panelists mentioned that we can't respond to this crisis with tools from yesterday, with past tools. We fully support the development of an effective post-2020 global biodiversity framework as key instrument for sustainable development that also would serve as a benchmark for transformative actions at the national level. The Republic of Moldova's goals is to incorporate nature-based solutions into adaptation planning and policy development with a focus on biodiversity conservation, ecosystem services management, and disaster risk reduction. On our path towards a green and sustainable development, we are determined to involve all stakeholders. And definitely, in closing, I would like to mention that to effectively address the triple planetary crises, stronger partnerships and enhanced international cooperations are essential. And definitely, we have to avoid the crisis amnesia, more dangerous, according to us, as selective amnesias to selective crises. Republic of Moldova stands ready to support a reinvigorated multilateral mechanism as a prerequisite to build forward better from multiple crises to a more resilient and sustainable world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for that contribution. Selective amnesia for selective crises. These are some of just the themes and sound bites coming through from our leadership dialogues. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm close by to His Excellency Getahun Wadaje, the Director General of the Environmental Protection Authority of Ethiopia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. As we commemorate the 50th anniversary of Stockholm Conference, we must ask ourselves what we have contributed to ensure a healthy planet as well as to tackle the various environmental crises we are facing collectively. It's a glaring fact that environmental challenges have been made worse rather than lessened over the last decade. Even though the necessity of charting out a long-term roadmap beyond 2030 is not questionable, it's equally important to focus on actions that we must take collectively between now and 2030. We don't have the luxury of time to plan beyond 2030. At this juncture, for instance, if we take climate change, the small windows of opportunity we have to reach a target of keeping the global average temperature to 1.5 degrees centigrade is closing fact. Our actions should match the urgency and magnitude of the challenges facing our planet and humanity. The implementation of the environmental dimension of sustainable development rests primarily the spirit of trusting each other, delivering on our pledges, and striving to end challenges collectively. Over the last decades, pledges and promises have been made, but delivery has lagged significantly behind. Unless the developed countries deliver on the promise and pledge, trust and frank discussions and collaborations cannot prevail under various multilateral settings. We must also establish effective and efficient coordination among various multilateral environmental agreements to ensure that triple planetary crises are addressed in a balanced and inclusive manner. Equally important is the need to bolster the national institutional capacity and capability of developing countries so that they have an enhanced capacity to comply with implementing international environmental agreements. This should be done at the same time as strengthening international environmental institutions, especially UNEP. More importantly, we must all live in expectations of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on financing sustainable development goals. In Ethiopia, we have been undertaking various endeavors that are geared towards addressing various environmental challenges and ensuring a healthy planet on all fronts. In the lead up to this conference, we have also organized a series of national consultations jointly with government of Sweden and UNDP, where existing gaps, challenges, and opportunities to be tapped, as well as initiatives and practice be scaled up at national level and beyond, were discussed in presence of various stakeholders. Thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. That's the contribution, ladies and gentlemen, from Ethiopia. I am making my way to Mr. Charles Sunkui. He is the Principal Secretary in the Ministry of ICT, Innovations and Youth Affairs in Kenya. And to him, I now yield the floor.
Excellency, co-chairs, on the outset, I wish to thank and congratulate Egypt and Finland in their capacity as co-chairs for this leadership dialogue for successfully steering this process to this juncture. My government recognizes the critical role you have both played in ensuring the global environmental issues that require accelerated action are brought to the fore. Toward this, the urgent need for scaling up environmental finance is not being realized. Many countries still have silo operations, and the environmental sector is one of the least funded, and where funding is identified, an imbalanced financial flow is witnessed, with funding being hugely channeled to the global north. Excellency, considering that environmental aspects such as climate change effects are transboundary in nature, I wish to therefore call for equitable financial flow of environmental funding and consideration to be made by all stakeholders towards increasing funds allocation to the environmental sector during their regular budgeting. Honorable Chairs, the triple planetary crisis is in our midst, and the world has now turned up to UNEP to provide leadership and guidance on how to shift from this reality. It is therefore important for UNEP to strongly and interdependently work with Member States through continuous consultation in decision-making activities as the implementation work remains with the respective countries. Third, multilateral environmental agreements are paramount in addressing the growing alarming crisis due to inextricable nature of environmental issues. None of the multilateral environmental agreement will be able to fully deliver on their mandate without the other. It's therefore prudent to call for cohesion to ensure that all the mayors deliver as one, with the UNEP playing its governing and coordinating role effectively. This is the time for voices of the mayors to be heard, as they are part and parcel of the environmental discussion. Lastly, Honourable Chair, private sector entities have now come on board and more willing to support the process of attaining solutions towards the environmental issues such as climate change issues, carbon emission reduction. I therefore call on all stakeholders to leverage on the new voices, including the youth and women, and work towards formulating concerted efforts and policies that leave no one behind to accelerate the achievement of the 2030 vision. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sankui. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm making my way to Her Excellency Nisreen Tamimi, the head of the Environment Authority of the State of Palestine. Madam, you have the floor. Your Excellency, please.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, peace be upon you. We in the state of Palestine, just like other countries, have adopted the development agenda of 2030. We have taken all the necessary legal and institutional measures to implement them. The national team to monitor and follow up on the implementation of sustainable development goals have been formed. A number of technical teams have been formed to follow up on the implementation on each target. These targets and goals have been incorporated in our sectoral and cross-sectoral programs and plans. These targets have been followed up by a number of indicators, through a number of indicators that have been agreed within the same plan. Our priorities have been established according to the necessity and according to our capabilities. Our first national voluntary report was issued in 2018 in order to monitor the rate of implementation of these goals. As you know, that we are in Palestine, we are under the Israeli occupation that is in control of our sustainable resources, and they are controlling more than 2/3 of our Palestinian territories. And as such, this occupation is the major challenge in the face of development in Palestine in the run-up of Stockholm+50. And in order to engage all stakeholders, we have conducted large-scale consultations with research centers and vulnerable groups. The report came with the fact that there was lack of environmental awareness in the schools and the universities, lack of financial resources, as well as the negative impacts of occupation on the environment. In light of the foregoing, we believe that we need to step up technical and financial support to developing countries and those countries in conflicts, providing more support to marginalized countries, raising public awareness, transfer of technology from advanced countries to developing countries and least developing countries. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, close by to me is the distinguished representative from Barbados, and I now yield the floor.
Thank you. Madam Moderator, Excellencies, friends, it is critical that we integrate socio-environmental dimensions in evidence-based frameworks that underpin national planning. If the maxim, what one can't measure, one cannot manage, has meaning, can we truly design impactful policies and programs, interventions, void of the needed data inputs? This is a global challenge. An investment roadmap for the UN Decade of Action is needed to address this. Second, it is critical that institutional reforms be undertaken at all levels to ensure synchrony with national sustainable development goals and within the Partnership for Development. Institutions that are fit for purpose must be a collective pursuit at all levels. The government of Barbados is actively engaged in the review and modernization of its social care institutional systems as part of our delivery of the SDGs. Third, enhanced inclusive governance models are needed to support the pursuit of sustainable development. New models should also be considered, such as the establishment of national major groups mechanisms based on government, UN, and civil society compacts. Micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises need a special capacity support carve-out in international and national development assistance programs, given their catalytic and transformational impact in eradicating poverty, building sustainable livelihoods, and promoting sustainable consumption and production patterns. On the matter of collective actions required on the debt issue to create fiscal space to enhance sustainable development opportunities, we need to ensure that both public and private financial sector stakeholders are a part of local multi-stakeholder sustainable development governance frameworks, and therefore financial programming must bear a new social conscience proudly. I thank you.
I thank you, the distinguished representative from Barbados. Thank you very much, Madam. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I make my way now to the distinguished representative from Canada. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Shabala. The main theme of this Leadership Dialogue 3 is money. I read the key message 1, scale up financing for development and environment. And indeed, we will need to align financial flows with environmental goals much more than it is the case today. In fact, we will need to shift capital flows on a massive scale and an unprecedented speed, as your panel explained some minutes ago. And one essential tool that we will need for this, and that Canada wants to contribute to develop, is a fair and effective international carbon pricing system, as has been done with the global minimal corporate tax. So if we don't have this tool, it will be very difficult to reach our goals. I will now begin speaking in French.
Another financial tool that is necessary are green bonds. Canada has just successfully launched an issue of green bonds to the tune of $7.5. Our second message to this dialogue, that we need to ensure transparency. And in order to achieve transparency, we need to improve climate-linked financial disclosures so that financial markets are enabled to take into account climate-linked the cost of climate-linked risks. So Canada intends to step up its role in the working group on financial decision-making. With regard to the promise of a financial package of $100 billion for climate in developing countries, Canada doubles its commitment and it would amount to $5.3 billion over 5 years. In order to succeed, ladies and gentlemen, we need massive and well-organized financing. There's no doubt that this Dialogue 3 will contribute to that goal, and you can count on Canada in that course.
And as you're speaking, seeing a lot of nods on the stage, so I'm looking forward to coming back to the panel for your reactions. And we're almost there with two more contributions coming from the floor. At this moment, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to yield the floor to the distinguished representative from the Marshall Islands. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam. You do an excellent job.
Thank you.
The Republic of the Marshall Islands wishes to thank the Minister of Finland and Egypt for serving as co-chairs for the Leaders' Dialogue, as well as the diverse group of panelists who all share a common message that a dramatic step up in implementation is urgently needed. Achieving this vision will require us all to address the difficult hurdles to effective finance. I have some responses and questions for the panelists and also for member states and organizations present here at this summit. First, we often heard the term innovative finance as a solution, and presumably this refers to using private sector investment to tackle public goals, which that sound very good. The reality is there are many vulnerable countries where this type of international private sector investment is only a distant dream. As an example, my own nation is the large tuna fishing port with almost exclusively foreign vessels. Their ownership structure does not really seem to ripe for this kind of innovative finance. So my question is, if we are all thinking about stepping up sustainable development finance at scale, what does innovative finance realistically mean in countries and regions which are their early frontier of foreign investment? Second, many small and highly vulnerable nations struggle to assess the current public development finance already on the table. Perhaps sometime the development finance system rewards those who are most prepared to have access, not always those most in need. Aid can be hard to access. If the world does not decide to scale up sustainable development finance, putting more money into a system which seems out of reach might not make the desired impact. So my question is how the international system best addresses vulnerability and not rewarding finance readiness or those countries that are just really so small and does not have access, where the real need is for the small state that try to be part of this system and to benefit. How do we have access? It's always, from climate change funding to, the green climate. It's not happening in the smaller state, the states, small island developing state in the UN. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to the distinguished representative. To ensure access to finance to those who need it the most. Is the finance really getting to the places where it's most needed? Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is our final contribution from the floor. It gives me great pleasure to yield the floor to the distinguished representative from Brazil.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you also to the panelists for their presentations. 50 years ago, the United Nations Conference on Human Environment brought for the first time environmental concerns to the center of the multilateral agenda and set the first milestone of the global environment governance system. The Stockholm '72 conference paved the way for the adoption 20 years later of the Rio Declaration, which consolidated the concept of sustainable development in its three inseparable pillars and established principles that since then have been guiding multilateral environment discussions and the coding of international environmental law. It is my country's strong belief that no reflection on the acceleration of the environment dimension of sustainable development can be made in a thoughtful and well-balanced way if we don't remain truthful to the principles set out in Rio and do not stay committed to the need of approaching with greater ambition the economic and social dimensions of sustainable development as well. The challenges we face on the different fronts of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution cannot be decoupled from the equally pressing social and economic needs we are facing as we try to reverse the negative impacts on food security and poverty eradication caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. At this crucial moment, it is also imperative to remain truthful to the spirit of solidarity that guided us in the adoption 30 years ago of the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. It makes no sense to discuss the acceleration of the implementation of the 2030 Agenda in any of its multiple dimensions without the corresponding discussion on the need to strengthen the means of implementation. It is, as never before, crucial to secure predictable, adequate, and transparent financial flows, as well as capacity building and technology transfer to developing countries as key enablers to achieve an equitable, fair, and sustainable recovery. We note with grave concern that many of the commitments agreed by developed countries over the last 3 decades in many different areas, such as climate change and the protection of biodiversity, have not been honored. In the face of such new challenges, including effectively implementing the UNFCCC's Paris Agreement, moving towards the adoption of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and negotiating a new international legally binding instrument for ending plastic pollution, we need, more than ever before, new, additional, and predictable resources for the benefit of developing countries. New innovative financing mechanisms, such as the valuation of the ecosystem services, should also be added to this list, and I'd like the panelists to comment on this specific point. We need, I'm almost finishing, we need not to shift our attention to parallel tracks, to new targets, or prescriptive one-fits-all solutions. We need to stay focused on the full implementation of existing multilaterally agreed upon commitments and on the existing multilateral processes we are already engaged in. The Agenda 2030 should remain our roadmap, and it cannot wait. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam. We cannot be distracted by parallel tracks. We need to fully meet the agreements that are already in place within the context of the multilateral space, and that is one of many of the suggestions made from the distinguished representative from Brazil. So, a lot has been said in this panel, and I'm sure that you have a lot of reflections and some reactions. But I am going to ask you to try and make it concise and focused. And I want to maybe borrow from Christiane's words earlier, where she said, what happens at Stockholm +100? What kind of moment will that be? Will we be celebrating, or will we be giving reasons for why we didn't do what we needed to do today? And that's why at COP100, or not COP100, Stockholm +100, we may not be celebrating in that moment. So with that as a backdrop, what do you think of all the things that you've heard? One thing that we need to do now to ensure that we are accelerating the environmental dimension, but in its acceleration, we're certainly moving in the direction of progress. I'm going to start off with you, Mr. Theo. One thing that we need to do today to make Stockholm+100 a celebratory moment.
Thank you very much, Madam Chabalala. You know, we are in a situation which I don't understand very much. We use taxpayers' money to promote harmful subsidies that are destroying us and destroying our planet. If we re-energize that negative energy to a positive energy, it can, by Stockholm+100, we may celebrate. But we have to change gears. I don't understand why we keep just subsidizing harmful subsidies that are destroying us and destroying our planet. I just don't understand that. So if you ask me one thing that we can do today, and that Stockholm+50 will be remembered for, maybe a commitment that we need to rethink the way we produce and the way we consume doesn't match with the need to protect the planet and to protect ourselves. So it is in our hands. I don't believe there will be more public money, public taxpayers' money to be collected for the needs that are there, the trillions of dollars that need to be invested. The more we invest taxpayers' money on harmful subsidies, the more we are harmful to our own GDP. We destroy nature, we destroyed our land, and we are jeopardizing 50% of our GDP. And yet, if we reinvest only 20%, just a fraction of the harmful subsidies, we can actually turn it into positive development, whereby by 2050, we can increase our GDP by 50%. So either we lose 50% of the GDP by our own making, or we re-energize that and build another 50% of our GDP by 2050.
So we either lose 50% of our GDP or we re-energize it and have an additional 50%. So, Christian, because I'm borrowing your words or stealing your words is probably more appropriate, I'm going to come to you last. So I'm going to go to Karthik next, and I'm going to ask you the same question. There's many suggestions and proposals, but one thing that you think, if we don't do it today, Stockholm+100 is certainly not going to be a celebratory moment. What would that one thing be?
So as you heard, just because it's hard to plan past 2030 doesn't mean we can't start taking action today, right? And so if we think back to the sustainability Rubik's Cube, right? Imagine everyone has a Rubik's Cube on their desk and everyone's trying to solve it on their own. It's going to take forever. Everyone's going to try to come up with their own solution. You have to exchange knowledge. You have to work together. You need systems in place where when something works, you can share it. When you have a need, when you have a problem, you can say, I have a problem, I need your help. Right now, people have problems, people have solutions. It's really not connecting, and that gets in the way. We need to be able to act today. Just because we don't know what we're going to do 10, 15, 20 years from now, we know what we have to do today. Let's take that step. It's very simple.
Exchange knowledge and take a step. Thank you very much, Karthik. Concise and to the point. That's what we need to do. Valerie, let's bring your voice in here. Lots of ideas, solutions, challenges, provocations around how we need to reimagine financing. What is the one thing that you think, if we don't do it now, certainly none of the things that we are visualizing are going to be anywhere near tangible by Stockholm+100?
So I couldn't agree more with what Ibrahim said about reimagining subsidies.
Yeah.
I also completely agree with what Johan said earlier about reimagining time and the idea, Karthik, of acting now. But I'm a good civil servant and a good bureaucrat, so I want to reimagine paperwork.
Okay.
Because we have a multiplicity of funds. There's a lot of conservation and climate finance intermediated through a multiplicity of funds. And we've taken a very entrepreneurial approach to designing different paperwork to access each fund. And that's an enormous cost, as our esteemed colleague from the Marshall Islands talked about, for those countries who are most in need of the finance to have the least ability to access it. So what we need to do is simplify the paperwork necessary to access finance. We need to harmonize it across funds so that a country can say the same things and produce the same evidence to apply to the different funds out there, not have to reimagine the application every time, because their time and their money is precious and we can't waste it on paperwork. And finally, we have to make that paperwork proportionate to the capacities and the capabilities of the least amongst us, because that means the money will flow to where it's needed most, not just to those places where people can write the best proposal.
Sure. That really, really is potentially one of the most refreshing insights I've heard. We need to reimagine paperwork, and we need to make sure that the paperwork is proportionate to the least amongst us. Thank you very much, Valerie, for that. Before I go to our co-chairs and call on Her Excellency Kari, Christian, again, to come back to your words that you shared with us today, what do you think? Fundamentally, just one action that we've got to get right today, coming out of Stockholm+50, if the moment that you painted for us of Stockholm+100 is going to be a positive one.
To borrow the words from the speaker from Moldova, we can't respond to a crisis with tools from yesterday. So to use a personal example, my country of Trinidad and Tobago, we just removed the subsidies for natural gas 2 months ago. We can't exactly expect to achieve the goals that we want, the 1.5 degrees to stay alive, if we keep using the old systems, using the old measurements, and not thinking ambitiously. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And again, raising the complexity of balancing their equation and having a realistic outlook on what that could look like. Ladies and gentlemen, let me call on Her Excellency Kari. Your Excellency, sitting in, listening in as co-chair, what would you say we need to get right today to have a positive and celebratory moment at Stockholm+100?
First of all, I want to thank you so much for being such a fantastic moderator. And I really hope that everyone was listening very carefully to the words of the youth representatives. I think in this discussion here, there's not just a sense of urgency, but there's a very strong sense of action that is needed. And I think the most important thing is that there is a largely and widely shared understanding that we need a systemic change. That is the thing that we need, because an economic system that is based on overconsumption of natural resources and fossil fuels, that's an unhealthy system, and we need to change it. So we need the shift to green economy, and that is the reason that I have to say that I really warmly welcome the youth Stockholm+50 policy paper that was delivered to us here today by the youth representatives, and I hope everyone here also reads it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and it was a very passionate contribution coming from the youth voice. Now, before I release my panelists, I'm going to ask them to stay with me on stage for a moment, and before I welcome back the co-chairs, I do want to tap into the collective voice one last time at this leadership dialogue, the third for the series. And I'm going to ask us to put up the Mentimeter question on your screens, and there you have it, a final opportunity for us to come together in one voice. www.menti.com. The code is 59204. 884. The question, what is the one action that you can take, to accelerate the implementation of the environmental aspect that we've been talking about, of course, in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030. Let's see what the one word is. I'm going to give it a couple of seconds. I'm keen to see what the word cloud comes up with before, of course, we go to the co-chairs. I see law is already big, so let's see what else comes up. And law, cooperation, a key element that has definitely come out of the conversation. Ecocide, listening to the youth, inclusion, finance. Let's see, we've got regulation, we've got activism, that's making another showing. Dialogue on the SSP, we've also got finance, we need to cap the resource use, political activity, and perhaps one more that I'm going to pick up, which is certainly maybe two more that have been my favorites so far, courage, and the last new favorite, paperwork. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes this segment of Leadership Dialogue 3. Might I ask you to please give my panelists a big round of applause, and as you do so, for my co-chairs to make their way up. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, our co-chairs are going to come up. They are going to share their final reflections with us, and they are going to formally close the meeting. From myself, Nozipho Shabalala, it's been a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shabalala, for how expertly you have been guiding our discussions this afternoon. Thank you, excellent panelists and all the participants for your active engagement, and I especially want to thank the representatives of the youth for your strong message and strong call to action. This discussion here today has proven that there is a deep sense of urgency among governments and stakeholders. Time to stop climate change and reverse loss of biodiversity is running out. We all need to speed up our action to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, to reach 1.5 degrees target, and to build nature-positive pathway. There is a strong recognition that the planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution are also humanitarian crises. We need to realize a just and fair transition, and we must adapt to climate change, conserve and restore biodiversity and ecosystems, and build resilience. We need urgent actions, and we need to work together towards the same goal so that no one is left behind. And we also need a paradigm shift for our economies. There are several reasons for that. First, natural resources fuel our production and consumption. The use of virgin natural resources is the main cause for climate change and decrease in biodiversity. Second, the green transition will trigger a new race for natural resources. Windmills, electric cars, and hydrogen solutions require more materials and low-carbon electricity. Third, half of the greenhouse gas emissions and more than 90% of biodiversity loss and water stress comes from consumption of resources. And last, the shocking Russian invasion in Ukraine has shattered the globe and revealed that we need to increase self-sufficiency and reduce our dependence on global material flows. There is no single solution to respond to these challenges. Transition to circular, just and more sustainable economy, it's not just about businesses. It is about the whole of society. We need to change the way we plan and design our policies, cities, and infrastructure, as well as our daily lives. We heard today one very practical and actionable recommendation to be established a sustainable consumption and production forum under ECOSOC. We have also heard today that we need not only to scale up finance, but also improve the access and quality of finance for sustainable development. It is also urgent to realign environmentally harmful subsidies and compensate those most vulnerable and affected by reforms. It is important to adopt green or sustainable budgeting. We need to urgently address deep-seated inequalities within and between countries and ensure that environmental protection and economic growth are mutually supportive. And it has been repeated in many interventions that we need to scale up access to affordable education and call for all countries to that integrate sustainable development considerations in educational programs. Many stakeholders wanted to remind of the risk that fossil fuels present to health and prosperity for all. And there was a call to work on a just phase-out of existing fossil fuel production. Finally, we need to ensure that children and youth of today will have opportunities to lead a good life in a healthy planet over the coming years. Young people are agents of change and must be part of making a sustainable future. We need to improve access and involvement of youth in political decision-making and generate strong partnerships with indigenous peoples and local communities. I now invite my distinguished fellow co-chair, Her Excellency Jasmine Fouad, Minister of Environment of Egypt, to deliver her closing remarks. And I want to thank her wholeheartedly for your sisterhood and for the great cooperation between our countries.
Thank you very much, Minister Emma. It has really been a very touching, actually, work that we have been doing together, and our colleagues also. And a moment that I'm very touched and thrilled about, that in 50 years we will not be here, but maybe our children and grandchildren would look up and say those were two strong women and very ambitious in the way they wanted the world to be different for us. As for the wrap-up, I'm not saying different than what Emma has mentioned and indicated, just very quick points that I felt was very important to stress upon based on the discussion. One important thing is that there is a need to act, and acting was yesterday, and there was not much that has been done. So today is the time to accelerate and scale up the action, and the action requires the means of implementation, but the different discussions showed that there is a drastic need and an urgent need to scale up finance from different sources at different levels. We're talking about quality, quantity, and access to finance, and to be predictable and transparent. Secondly, the right for the developing countries and people to meet their aspiration and to achieve development. And in doing so, they have to be able to make progress in development while conserving their natural resources and assuring the sustainable development. And throughout the discussion of the how, there was that idea of how can we do that with the means of implementation, the idea that talked about food system, how people can change the way they eat, even at the level of the technologies. How can technology coding be done and achieved? And that would be coupled with finance. The development and the environmental loop must be closed. And from that, how can we transfer the commitment and the pledges into actual actions on the ground? And this was also discussed through different means of implementation. But those commitments and pledges are not really financial only. They are financial and technical, while leaving no one behind, either in the development path, which is the SDGs and the Sustainable Development 2030, or the climate action that called upon the Paris Agreement. Also, the final is that the environmental action should not overshadow the right for the people and the nation for development. Humanity faces so much threat and challenges, and we know that the climate is the most risking one because it's about our survival on the one and only planet. Yet, we share a common but differentiated responsibility towards the way we address those challenges, and that no single model for the sustainable development and accelerating environmental dimension could really fit all countries, but rather a sustainable development action better and to accelerate that need to respect the national capabilities and the unique circumstances and experience of different countries, rather than going through a trial and error in a time that we don't have really the luxury nor the option to do so. Finally, as we were, our previous ancestors were here 50 years, and they had got into Stockholm a number of multilateral environmental agreements that were adopted. We need to respect that and renew our commitment and adoption, and really learn from the lessons that did not help us to do the progress that was first planned for, instead of reinventing the wheel and say, let's start from the beginning, because there's no much time to do so. Before concluding, I would like to remind you that the summaries of the 3 leadership dialogues will be presented by the co-chairs in the plenary hall after the conclusion of the general debate under agenda item 7. Leadership Dialogue 3 of the Stockholm+50 international meeting is now concluded. I thank you all for your contribution, and once again I would like to thank the government of Stockholm and my active co-chair from Finland for an excellent work, and also all the teams from the 2 sides that have been working for the past 4 months, and all those who had shared their consultations, and much more important, our future generation and the youth which we will hear. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.